Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. It's the podcast that takes a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I've got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling and therapy, and I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA. I'm on a mission to help people more easily understand mental health and relationships and help break down the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy. And that's why every week a guest therapist and I talk about a movie and what relationship or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. We really do appreciate you helping us accomplish our mission of making mental health easier to understand and engage with. Today's show is very, very special. I had the incredible honor of meeting and talking with Chip Dodd, author of Voice of the Heart. If you've listened to this show for even a few episodes, you know how much that book is mentioned and just how central it is in my life and in my practice. Chip brought with him 2002's We Were Soldiers. IMDb says it's the story of the first major battle of the American phase of the Vietnam War and the soldiers on both sides that fought it, while their wives wait nervously and anxiously at home for the good news or the bad. Listen, I could continue to go on and on about how much this episode means to me, or I could just let you guys hear it. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Chip.
Hey, Josh.
Thank you. I was talking with my wife before we went to bed last night, and we were talking about today.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to try to not fangirl out too hard. So there might be a couple of moments today where I go a little cross-eyed.
Yeah.
And, just snap your fingers to get me back in there. But I just can't even appreciate.
Well, I just hope not to let you down.
Well, I can't even begin to express how much I appreciate you coming on. Before we started recording, I just shared with you a little bit, and I've said it on the show before, but Voice of the Heart was the first book that was recommended to me in my journey, and the first book that I've read. I think I've read it 6 times now. Wrote a paper on it in grad school. I use it. It's the first book I recommend to every client that comes through my doors. I've got the laminated sheet on the floor.
You do? Oh, great.
I mean, it's one of the building blocks to my heart, or maybe the reconnection to my heart as an individual, and just really one of the foundations of my work as a clinician as well. And so, moving to Nashville 4 years ago now, I had this thing in me that I was like, Chip's up here. I'm gonna see if I can't meet him sometime.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And finally have time. So for the years past, there was just no time. Now I have time. I want to participate more than I've gotten to do in the past. So it's great. I love seeing you.
Well, I like to start out every conversation I have with a guest with the question, why therapy? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. As you were even sharing that about the Voice of the Heart, one of my sons said to me that, because he's gotten into the field, he said that people will comment to him about the Voice of the Heart, or he's been around me while somebody else say something to me about it, or some of the other books, and he says, you know what, Dad, you're always surprised, and people are surprised, I think, that you're surprised, like you're acting. And I'm genuinely, like when you said what you said, the intro, of course, it feels wonderful. At the same time, it's kind of like, really? That there's always that surprise.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, it's just gratitude that I've gotten to contribute in ways that have actually helped people I don't even know. So I'm really pleased about that. So thank you for what you shared about that.
I my mentor, Dr. David Olshine, he turned 60 a few years back, and his daughter had a bunch of people that he had impacted write letters to him.
Yeah.
And in that letter, I told him, you'll never know the measure of the impact that you've had on the world, because every person I impact is a direct result of the impact you had on me.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is our first time meeting, but I would consider it the same thing with you. Like, I mean, just your work, your book has just had such an impact on me that, it's like a pyramid scheme of heart work. It goes to me and then to everybody that I see and everybody that they see. And, because I've had clients say that they've bought it for people too.
That's wonderful. I love it, and I love getting to do it. But the main thing is, I started and ran the Center for Professional Excellence, which is a treatment center, extended treatment for professionals. We say professionals, but people of heart who have given themselves to some mission and have generally been successful, except they lost heart along the way through addiction, or addiction became the expression of hiding the heart or trying to find the heart. But these people, it's been a wonderful to me, and it mattered to me too, because I was a person who had lost heart. And there was, by God's grace, I ended up bumping into a mentor in Texas who actually introduced me to a world of feeling. I was working on my PhD at North Texas. And I was taking an alcohol and drug abuse certification on the weekends. She was recovering, introduced me to like this unusual world of emotion, because the PhD was not, let's just say it wasn't focused on feelings,
Yeah.
It was more the intellectual approach and CBT and all those sorts of things. So in treating professionals, these people are the most educated people in the world. And we treated people, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, Harvard, Duke, people from Canada, Mexico, just all over the world. And these were established physicians, pastors, business leaders, some professional athletes, entertainment people. And I'll never forget this. He was the physician who actually declared Lee Harvey Oswald deceased. Yeah, we're talking about back ages and ages ago. Yeah, and he since then he's also passed away. But I remember him putting his notebook down on the floor in our little lecture room. We only treated 10 people at a time, so it was just really.
Is that CPE?
Yes, CPE, and in Nashville. And he said, "Where has this been?" And we were talking about feelings, needs, desire, longings, and hope, talking about the spiritual root system, which I developed in 91. And he said, I'm educated. I've been all over the world. I'm established. I've had primacy in my profession. I've had prestige. I've read everything. And it's like, where has this been? And so, this has been around forever. But it's almost like our culture, our the way things are, we figure over feeling, and then if we do feelings, it's always just feelings for feeling's sake instead of feelings for the purpose of living.
Yeah.
And I just remember he was astounded, and I was befuddled. He was profoundly affected, and I was humbled. And I just was like, I don't know where it's been. It's just that, but it's always been. And so it's like I got to sort of digging around in the dirt. I sort of hit the top of a box and dug it up, and there was what we'd always known, Yeah. And it's just sort of like for maybe a little bit of for our time for now, I just picked up a string that runs all the way back for thousands of years and will run forward for thousands of years. And I've gotten to be a ripple, like you talked about the rippling effect, We're all just ripples, of other people's impact in so many ways. So anyway, I'm astounded that book and really that book mainly, and then the other ones that have come out of it, and me getting to do it because I returned to the very thing I wrote about. Jesus says, they said in Matthew 18, who's the greatest among all of us? And Jesus brought a child and said, unless you change and become like one of these, you can't even enter the kingdom of heaven. You don't get what this is about. And that's what it's like for me. It's like the heart is simply a place we return to, and then start using our heads for what they're made to do beyond count things.
Mm-hmm.
It's to articulate ideas and dreams and imagination and feelings and our craving for connection and our hunger to live and on and on and on.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's wild. So, but thank you for what you said.
Yeah. I thank you for the work that you've done and continue to do. The majority of the clients that I see, it's never a knowledge problem. It's never that they don't know enough.
No.
And as a result of that, I always tell them, clearly knowing something, knowledge is not going to help you because you already know so much. And so if it was just a matter of telling you, hey, read this book or this article, then, I could just move people in, move people out. It'd just be a
Easy.
Carousel of,
you have the secret article, you give them the secret article.
Right. But it's not, it's a matter of reconnecting. And before I wouldn't have been able to conceptualize it this way, but before I started my therapeutic journey as a client, I was divorced from my heart is how I ended up saying it. Mm-hmm. And so Voice of the Heart for me was a way of taking a simple framework, which was really, it worked well for me. A simple framework and using it to build a foundation to engage with intrapersonal intimacy with inside of me, which then helped to engage with interpersonal with other people.
Absolutely.
And I think ultimately also helped me develop a more intimate relationship with God.
No doubt.
And
which is back to creation itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the major tenet that we work off of is that you and I are created as emotional and spiritual creatures, created to do one thing, it's live fully. Yeah. But we can't do it except, like you said, starting with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have to go home to who we're made to be.
It's a reflection of the image of God in us.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I think I mentioned to you, like 95% of the clients I see are some form of sexual addiction. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are also people who have experienced some kind of trauma in the church in reaction to their addiction. Mm-hmm. And in some cases have even said that, their churches have kind of told them to turn their hearts off, just do what we say.
Yeah.
And, I've gotten now to where, I'm starting to think, I wonder why it is that people think that in order to engage with the divine, you have to turn off part of what was given to you by the divine.
Yeah.
Whereas I kind of look at it as a reconnection of your heart and your brain working together and a reconnecting of your soul to that as well. Integrity. Like we're not supposed to use one or the other or one of the three or the other and turn the others off. Like God gave them all to us.
Yeah.
And so to get them all working in conjunction together, that's kind of how you get the machine up and running to where it needs to be.
Yes. Yeah. Sonia and I were at a church function, sort of a evening carnival, and Sonia and I were in charge of it's always been called the cake walk, but this was the cookie walk. And the little kids were doing the numbers, play the music, land on a number, get cookies. And there was a wagon of cookies. I mean, like a little red wagon, but it had walls on it. So it was just piled like 1.5 feet of cookies, 3 to a bag. And so the child would win. And it was like, hey, here's your cookies. Get your cookies. Like, you want to play again? And it was interesting to watch the parents like, okay, you can play once. You got your cookies. We're leaving. You can't have any more. And I listened to them. Now, I'm older now. So, I'm sure I was like that, but I'm not like that anymore. And they would say, you've had enough. You can't have any more. That's plenty. Leave stuff for others. I mean, all good stuff, all proper, rule-oriented. I get that. That there's a time in which we have to recognize that others have the same needs as us. Empathy, right? But I'm thinking, like, let them play again. Let them have as many cookies as they want. The more cookies, the more they can give away. And there were piles of cookies. There were so many cookies that I guarantee you there were cookies thrown away. And I was thinking that the parents won't let the child crave. And they won't let the child want what they want when they want it. And God has created us from birth as cravers. We're made to crave. But we so often equate craving with sin and craving with harm, not recognizing that there's a difference between lusting and craving. Mm-hmm. We're made to crave connection. We're made to crave fulfillment. We're made to crave, our needs being met. We're made to crave sadness ending, loneliness stopping, hurting healing. We're made to crave wholeness and freedom from tragedy. And so we're made to want what we want when we want it. And then if we mature and we're allowed to want, like have all the cookies you want, let's see what happens. But more than likely, you won't kill yourself with cookies. So when we want what we want it, we grow into having to grieve when we don't get it. But instead of being allowed to grow to grieve, we're told not to want, not to hunger. Mm-hmm. So if we will be allowed to crave, we'll grow into tolerance, which is tolerating not yet, wait, no. The answer is no, you can't have it. Mm-hmm. But instead of being allowed to crave, we end up suppressing the heart of who we are, the desire within. And lust has to take the place because God has created us to crave. So if we're not allowed to crave because of the rules, we're going to lust. And lust is an attempt to get your cravings met without having to be in need, without people knowing that you want it. Mm-hmm. So it's like secret craving. Mm-hmm. And so it's just very, very, very tragic. When you lose heart, intellect, willpower, morality supersede how God made us.
And I think since like going to grad school, getting trained, all of this stuff, one thing that I've learned is that, and the person that helped me learn this was saying it in regards to children. Mm-hmm. Any behavior is an attempt to get an unmet need met.
Yes.
And what I've seen is that's true even for adults.
Yeah.
And so if you have disengaged with your heart, then your other systems are going to begin to overfunction.
Yeah.
Because it's not like that gets rid of your needs.
No.
Your needs are still there. You still
and the
have
closer
to...
you are to your heart, the more you can say what your motives were. Mm-hmm. The farther you're away from your heart, the more you make excuses, right? You know?
Yeah. Todd told me one time, I had called him and we were on the phone, and I think I was just lamenting how tough engaging with my feelings was.
Yeah.
And I said, is there anybody that this comes naturally for? And he said, yeah. And he used his daughter as an example.
Yeah. And
he said, when she's sad, she cries.
Yeah.
When she's angry, she gets angry.
Yeah.
He said, it's really like as you grow up, that gets kind of ground out of you. Mm-hmm. And you get taught to not feel.
Yeah.
And then most of us have to come back and learn how to do it all over again in our adulthoods.
Yeah.
Whereas, and in looking back at my childhood, there's times where I can see that, and every time with the best of intentions, but I can see that happening. One phrase that my family used to say a lot, and it was meant to suppress anger, but it was don't be ugly.
Yeah.
Don't be ugly. And this association gets created between anger and ugliness, and you don't want to do that.
Yes.
That's not, it's not proper.
Yeah. Loneliness means something's wrong with you. Mm-hmm. Sadness means you don't appreciate what you've been given. I mean, the list goes on and on. And then we gained all of these sayings that we know better than the Bible. Pull yourself up by your
bootstraps.
Yeah, that's water under the
bridge.
You can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you can't run with the big dogs, get on the porch. I mean, just and self-reliance, self-sufficiency, independence from need, hatred towards vulnerability, contempt towards being human. I mean, these things become the things, our defenses become our identity instead of who God created us to be, which really means we have to develop a perseverance and resilience in being true to who we're made to be. There's the real strength.
Yeah.
Being strong enough to be vulnerable.
That to be your authentic self is to be vulnerable. Like you can't be vulnerable without being that, and you can't be that without being vulnerable.
Yep.
And so to just even engage in that fear of showing who you really are to people.
Absolutely. In fact, addiction, my world has been in the world of addiction. and recovery of heart. And about 2 years ago, it finally hit me. After all of this work, I've gotten the definition of addiction down to 3 words: intolerance for vulnerability.
Yeah.
I can't tolerate vulnerability, and yet I'm still made to be connected,
Mm-hmm.
which requires vulnerability. So I take my need to be connected to something I can control at first, which ends up controlling me.
Yeah.
So alcohol, drugs, work, sometimes religion, exercise, cosmetics, food, power, control.
It's like a Mad Lib. We can put anything in there.
Yep. Fill in the blank.
Have you read Russell Brand's book Recovery? So it has become, Voice of the Heart's still in number 1 slot in recommendations to clients. It has become number 2.
Yeah. Until you have him on.
Until well, I tell you, if he ever makes it on, I'll tell him about Voice of the Heart, and we'll get it out further. Yeah. But he's somebody, I think he's in his like 18th year of sobriety, something like that, multiple addictions. And the book is kind of explaining the 12 steps in a very just kind of simple way. And he actually uses examples from his own recovery in how to engage with them as well. And the best example of which is like, in step 4, where he's talking about making his list of resentments. He talks about having to put his own mom on there because he resented her for getting cancer and leaving him.
Yeah.
And I have it on audio. I've got the hard copy of it. And I remember I was listening to that. I was walking the dog one morning and I was just struck by that might be the most vulnerable thing I've ever heard anybody say in a book, that they would resent a parent for getting sick.
Yeah. And doing something happening to them they couldn't do anything about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just no control over that at all. And, and so that's another where if I've got a client who I feel like is just having trouble engaging in the 12 steps, I always just say, hey, just read this.
Yeah.
That'll break it down a little easier for you.
Yeah.
What do you think? You mentioned that engaging with your heart, with your emotions, part of what God made us to be. We've talked about how kids seem to come a little bit easier to that than adults do.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think it is that causes a person to get disengaged from their heart?
Yeah.
I know it's a big question. There's probably not one answer, but
I think it's honestly, it's and this is a sad story, but I think it's tragically true story. One, I think that life is tragic, and I think God is faithful in the midst of that. And I think the only way we can reconcile that conflict, life is tragic and God is faithful. The conflict is, if God is so faithful, then how come all these terrible things happen? And so if terrible things happen, then maybe God's not so real or good or kind or loving or doesn't really. So we're asking hard questions, and these questions are all related to pain, which is feelings and needs and loss and heartache and having wonder in our hearts and not being able to reach it, or experiencing something so wonderful we don't want to leave it. I mean, it's all that's pathos. It's life's pulse within us. So and the only way though that conflict is reconciled is through struggle. In the Bible, Jacob's struggle became a name change, Israel, which means to struggle with God and live, to be blessed by struggling, which is allowing the heart to have a voice, which is have a voice to God and a voice to others and a voice from inside myself. And so the sad thing is that when life happens, most of us don't have a home to go to. Like life pain happens, home is a place where we need to be able to say how it hurts. Mm-hmm. And there's not somebody there to tell us how it shouldn't, how it doesn't, or how it doesn't need to bother us so much, or our reaction to it's too big. Instead of being controlled, we need to have a place to struggle. And I think that trauma is going to happen anyway in life, but the most traumatic thing is to go home with the pain and not be allowed to process it. because from the voice of the heart, hurt processed becomes healing and courage. Sadness processed becomes acceptance. It strengthens us rather than weakens us. But because most parents have an intolerance for the vulnerability that children bring into their lives, they end up trying to control the child's heart instead of walking with them as the child heals, trusting the process. And that's so. The in the name of love, in the name of help, the parent often shuts the child down because the parent themselves don't know what to do. If they can't fix it,
or it's too uncomfortable for them to engage.
I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel this. So we get rid of the child to protect the child and protect the parent.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But I think that's where most of our loss of heart comes from.
And I wonder if, just kind of even in phrasing it that way, conceptualizing it that way, I wonder if people could hear that, how many more of us would realize this state of our heart.
Yeah.
Because it's not so much like you had to have had this invasive trauma happen to you that, shattered your world.
No, research has shown that more than physical beatings and even sexual abuse, the most profound form of abuse, form of harm, trauma, is neglect, emotional and spiritual neglect. And the most powerful and painful neglect is coming from a good family where everything was done right and yet nothing was processed in terms of with feelings. So the way, the truth, and the life as a set of rules instead of a relationship.
Yeah.
So believe it or not, it's so ironic, isn't it? But if you're hit, you know it. If you're sexually abused, you know it. But if your heart's kind of it's taken from you at night while you're asleep, you don't even know you lost it.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
So we, Steve and James and I just finished a book called Hope in the Age of Addiction. And something I've been saying for a long time is that there are people who have recovery of heart and there are people who are in addiction. And I know there's some play in between. I don't mean to be rigid, but either there are people who are connected to their hearts and are capable of living in the strength of vulnerability, which means they're connected enough and have security enough in relationship that they can take risks with their hearts outside the home, so to speak. But there are those people, and then there are people who are doing whatever they got to do to have control over life, which means you have to medicate. You have to be in denial. You have to run from your trauma instead of, actually walking into the pain and coming back to who you were made to be.
Yeah.
I mean, trauma's controlling our world and addiction's controlling trauma.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, I can't help but just think about secure attachment.
Yeah.
As you're talking about that and how so much just gets modeled from our parents.
Yeah.
And, I've had clients to where they begin to express feeling ashamed that at their age, they're learning these things now.
Yeah.
And we'll go back and do, a genogram. We'll talk through their family of origin. And I'll say, how could you have learned this? Like, look at the system that you're coming from. There's no shame, which even as I'm phrasing that now, I feel like I might be trying to shut something down again. But there's no shame in not knowing something you weren't taught.
Yeah.
How could you drive a car if nobody ever taught you how to drive a car?
Yes.
How could you cook an egg if nobody ever taught you how to cook an egg?
Yes, and that's the original pain is the self-blame for what we weren't taught. I mean, believe it or not, toxic shame actually gives me a sense of control. One, it takes away the fault of the person who I want to love me for having taught me these things, and then it tells me what to do. Like, okay, if I learn this, I'll be okay. If I conquer this should, then I'll be better. So I should have known this. I should have done this, instead of facing, you didn't teach me, and now I'm helpless.
And now I've got to
Now I've got
grieve
to
that
ask,
loss.
yes, and be
which,
vulnerable.
Which I think for adults, when you can look back and identify these deficits from your childhood,
Yeah.
needs, that some of them are bound by an era of time. We have certain needs in childhood.
Yep.
That are bound to our childhood. And,
Yep.
and even if we identify them and the fact that we didn't get them met in adulthood, we can't go back
Yep.
to get them met. And so the work then becomes, and I'm saying this as somebody who tried unconsciously to do that, but we have to then as adults grieve that loss.
Absolutely. Even like I've raised two sons. Sonia and I have raised two sons. And like I say, there's a parenting with heart book that Stephen and I also wrote, and one of the realities is that clumsy is as good as we're ever going to get. We're all like giraffes running on ice, right? And so I've harmed my sons. I mean, there's no way not to. I've written The Voice of the Heart, Parenting with Heart, Needs of the Heart, Keeping Heart, a novel, Perfect Loss, and the Beatitudes, and it's like parents fail. Period. And the only difference between the failed parent and the other failed parent, which means we all fail, one parent is in denial, and if they do come close to dealing with harms done, it's justification. Hey, I'm sorry I did so-and-so, but. And the healthy parent, the parent that actually, frankly loves themselves, others, and God, actually says, I'm sorry. Healthy people seek forgiveness and unhealthy people seek justification. And my sons are grown, and I'm in pursuit of my own sons because, like, I've harmed them. I mean, I messed up. I missed things. I regret things. I'm old enough with remorse. Like, oh, I wish I want them to know that. And I also want to hear from them about that. Anything that keeps us apart is something that divides love from each other. And I love my sons. And, I can tell you stories. I harmed them here. I harmed them here. Mm-hmm. I can also tell you stories of celebration and laughter. But whatever they can't tell me and us process through because of something that they fear or I hurt them or they're sad about something, and where we in terms of our past, then it's something that leaves them isolated or leaves them alone, or at least if nothing else, takes them away from a relationship I'd love to have with them.
Yeah.
I want to know these people the rest of my life, and love, I mean, the moment we love someone, you know this like crazy, but the moment we love someone, we sign a contract of pain. Mm-hmm. I mean, because, when we love somebody, we give up control. I mean, we're saying, I'm going to tolerate the phone call at midnight with children. It's the highway patrol. I'm going to live with, you know what I'm saying? I'm going to live with somebody that anything can happen to.
Yeah.
That I could wind up in a crazy way in an upside down world at your funeral instead of you winding up at mine. You're the younger, I'm the older, and I have to bury you. I mean, you signed a contract of love, and that extends us into vulnerability and need. And so, I'm in for the pain.
Yeah.
I'm willing to do the suffering because of love.
When you were talking about your son,
which means seeking forgiveness.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think about something that Terry Murphy told me one time, that in a relationship, hurt is a given. Hurt's gonna happen. Yeah. If you put two people in a blank room with nothing in it, eventually somebody's gonna hurt the other. And she said that it's not avoiding or trying to prevent the hurt that's more important so much as it is the circling back and repairing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that just requires, like, speaking of, shame and toxic shame, it just requires so much humility to be able to circle back. And I think, you gave the example of yourself with your sons.
Yeah.
I have a buddy back home in South Carolina who said, and he told me a story behind it, but he said, the best thing a parent can do for their kids is to deal with their own stuff.
Yep.
To deal with their own emotions. Because otherwise, in your effort to not deal with them, you're going to try to transfer it. Yeah. So if you're feeling shame, you're going to try to disguise it as anger and slide it across the table at your kid to where they feel the shame and you don't have to deal with it. Yeah. But to be able to circle back to repair, I think is going to help build that secure attachment and that safe harbor, strong anchor that you were talking about before.
Safe place to be vulnerable.
Creating that place where your kid can come back and say, hey, this is really messy. I don't have this figured out, but this is what I'm feeling and experiencing right now. With my clients, I call it just dump the box out on the floor and let's sort through it together.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to clean it up before you let it out.
Yeah.
Just dump it out.
Yeah. That's trust.
And then we'll start sorting through everything together. And I had this visual one time with a client. I should get like a Tupperware or a toy chest full of different colors of Legos. And then when they are hitting that wall, just like dump it all out and we can start sorting those colors as a way of just, experientially like, we'll walk this together because
to do otherwise, Josh, is actually insane. You know, what Terry Murphy said is that you and I are going to hurt each other. So that's a fact. That is an a priori reality. That is like dirt and gravity. I mean, it's there. To not know what to do with hurt, to not be able to feel hurt, to not be able to process hurt, means we're not able to heal hurt. And if you can't do hurt, you can't do life.
Yeah.
And life's about relationship.
You can't do relationships.
So this idea that feelings are minimal or don't need to be paid attention to or need to be gotten over, that's a mark of insanity. Now, feeling for its own sake is also insanity, just having feelings. I mean, I read a quote by Janis Joplin, and I'll chew this up, but she said that, intellect is just like a joke. And feelings are all that matter. And when you do feelings, you do music. You do feelings, you do soul. And so she loved to just go at the feelings, just a giant musical, talented expression of them. But see, she could have them, but she didn't know what to do with them. So, and she also talked about that one of the loneliest places she'd ever been is leaving the stage after 20,000 people were loving her, super connected except for her performance. But when she turned around and went backstage, she was with her presence. And turns out her best friend was heroin.
Yeah.
Heroin was her partner. Died at the age of 27. 18 days or so after Jimi Hendrix overdosed at the age of 27, 8 months or so before the guy with the Doors, Jimmy Morris, died of an overdose at 27. Wow. So these are people that broke away from the intellect only and got into like, let yourself feel it. But instead of having the courage of doing something with the feelings, like using them as tools, it became a sensual pursuit instead of a relational,
which becomes
pursuit.
Impulse.
Yes.
And I've often said that, like, in separating out your brain from your heart, if you only operate with your brain, like logically, then it just becomes a matter of economics, right. What makes the most sense at the time, and you end up becoming cold. Yeah. If you only operate out of your heart, then it's all impulse. It's all, what do I want at the moment? Yeah. And so they have to work in conjunction with each other.
A great movie for that, for your audience, is Drop Dead Fred. It is, have you seen it?
You might be the only other human on this earth that I think has seen it.
That movie is a test to see if you have contempt towards your child within, or if it's the dumbest, stupidest, most idiotic movie you've ever seen, it means you have contempt for your child within. And at the same time, it shows clearly what happens if the brain doesn't engage with the heart. Because the child within, just released to its own devices, becomes a big person who can do great damage.
Like chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's this beautiful thing. The brain needs to be used to articulate the imagination, the desires of the heart. And the heart needs to give it to the brain, and the brain needs to figure things out, but the heart needs to lead. I mean, it's the life's blood. Yeah. The brain's a good, frontal lobe logic. Like, hey, let's check this out before we go jump.
Yeah. And then...
but jumping we're made to do.
Yes.
Instead of the brain telling the heart, never jump.
Well, even if you think about, like, taking that risk, it's just another expression of vulnerability. Like, if I know I have limitations... and I may be able to do almost anything, but I can't do everything, then inevitably to jump is to take our hands off the wheel, if even for a second, and know that, hey, this thing that I want, I don't know if it's going to turn out the way that I want it, but I'm going to try for it.
Yeah. You know, there's a you said take your hands off there. There's a car wash here in town. This older lady said that she heard from God at this car wash. There's a sign when you pull in, your car goes in the tracks, and the sign says, let's see, take your foot off the brake. No, wait, put your car in neutral, take your foot off the brake, and let go of the wheel. And see, she heard God tell her, she was into a real controlling situation, trying to control one of her grandchildren and fix him and make him see, and all he did was get sicker. And finally, she heard God say, put your car in neutral, take your foot off the brake, and let go of the wheel. Like, I got it. And then that next process, when you let go, your car comes out clean. I mean, kind of.
Was that God or Carrie Underwood? Did she have the radio on when she
when she got half of it? Take your off the wheel. Take your hands.
And I think that's an interesting thing to think about too. And coming from a background of working in churches, I came to realize in my struggle to grasp this, that it's something the church has really failed at communicating. It's the concept of surrender. Yeah. Because I think that at least the way that I caught that message was so tied to this, militant idea of surrender, this God as an aggressor. And even the Chris Tomlin song, We Wave Our White Flag, I just thought, I like that you're talking about surrender, but you're using a metaphor that's not right. It's
Correct.
Not a matter of God has entered into battle with us and we've lost and we open up the gates and he rushes in. It's more of a matter of, and I, like most things in life, I go back to recovery language for it. My thinking got me into this, and so my thinking can't get out. I find someone who has what I want. Yeah. I ask them, how did they get it? Yeah. They tell me how to get it. Yeah. And I surrender to that. Yeah. It's a recognition that there is something outside of the 6 foot of personal space around me. Yeah. And that I don't, as best as I want to remain an expert, I don't know how to get it. And so I have to surrender and trust that there's another way. And even in times when my brain is screaming, no, do this, even in times where my heart is crying out, no, do this, I have to just go back to, I have surrendered and, like step 3, given my life and will over to God as I understand him. I have surrendered to this, and I will just do the next thing that this tells me.
This is such a beautiful story and explanation, because you're describing craving. I want to live. I'm hungry to live. I desire to live. Do you know how to do it? Well, I'm giving this over to you because I can't find it. Do you know how to get it? And if you know how to get it, I want it, and I'll give myself surrender. I mean, I looked up the word. This may be a little bit off, but the book first came out, Voice of the Heart, in 2000. I had some radio interviews in the beginning.
2000, really?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
19 years ago. Can you believe that?
Wow.
I was almost young. And I felt young. I still feel young, but I'm old. But and we would talk about the feelings. This was like it was like ahead of its time. It was strange. It's not ahead of its time. It's all time. But and as we finished, they say, Dr. Dodd, what would be one word that you would say would encapsulate what you're talking about? Which meant I had done a terrible job on the radio interview. So it was like, and I'd say, well, the one word. If I had to give one word, I'd say the word is surrender. There's the name. That's the name. Surrender. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Dodd. Goodbye. Click, and then they do a little off microphone. Thank you. I'm sure people enjoy it. And I never hear from anybody again. And because surrender was like failure. Yeah. And surrender, all it means is to render. It means to give back what you took. Years ago, I got enough wounds in my life. I figured it out. I'm not doing this hope crap. I'm going to be strong. I'm not letting anybody get to me. I vowed. It's like I will smile my way into it. You can knock me around all you want, but you're never going to get to me. I sealed myself off as a way to be successful. I took what God had given me and ran off with it. But by God's grace, I came to the sort of like the back end of a dead end alley. I had nowhere else left to go. There wasn't a hole big enough for a rat to get through, so I couldn't get out. And and I was approached for help. Like, do you want something better than what you've got? It's like, yeah. And if you got it, sure. But I wasn't surrendered yet. I was acting. Like, yeah, sure, whatever. But surrender means to give my heart back. I stole my heart and ran off with it, and I'm giving it back to who started it, who gave it to me. And it usually happens through other people, because in the beginnings of this, it's like trusting God. It's like, I already tried God, or, yeah, well, maybe. But then when people start being the hands and feet and voice of God, like, hey, listen, I've been where you're sitting. I'm like, you don't have to live there. I'm like, really? You sure?
Which is an example of being vulnerable in your authenticity, like bringing your authentic self in a move of vulnerability. And I think that when you are vulnerable, it's an invitation.
Absolutely.
Like if I bring my true self to the table, it takes a lot of hard work for you to keep that wall up.
Yep.
It's possible. I mean, that can happen.
Oh, I can. Yeah, sure. But something in us, you mentioned at the very beginning, the Imago Dei. I mean, the image of God within us, born to crave fulfillment, thriving, relationship, love, tenderness, care, affirmation, creation, creating. I mean, and so when somebody keeps knocking on that door, it's like we keep putting notes through the door, say, go away, I don't want any. But sooner or later, it's like, please stay.
Yeah. Which really, by just keeping that door, it's just saying, I'm too scared to open this door.
The sickness, for a long time, like with Sonia, I was wounded enough that I decided that she would have to prove that she loved. She would have to prove that love was real. And so I was always raising the bar, like I won't trust until you show me, instead of I've got to be willing to take a risk of trusting that you already have shown me.
Yeah.
There's that surrender again, that vulnerability. The problem is not other people. The problem's us.
Oh, yeah.
Until it's not. Then it's other people. But, so.
Well, I think, that goes back to recovery language. And it's something that I say to Leanne all the time. It's something that I talk about whenever I'm in conflict with somebody, is just looking for that, what's my part in this?
Yeah.
And I don't think that just applies to like a conflict. But I mean, to me, it's always, well, no matter what's going on with another person, I'm always in it.
Yeah, and that could be celebration. What's my part in this?
Yeah.
Like I brought you a present. That's my part.
Yeah.
You mentioned the true self earlier, and what I call the true self, and I think this is important because it's hard to, the true self becomes general like the word soul, but there really is a true self, I believe, and I've seen this. And written about it and talked about it. And I've watched people, move into, the guy that said, where has this been? The true self is how you're born, and born equipped, but it just has to be grown. The true self is what you feel, what you need, what you desire, what you long for, and what you hope. That is the true self. And that is made to grow up into somebody who can intellectually make choices, intellectually pursue how they're made, who they're made to be, and what they're made to do. But I mean, the true self is born. It doesn't have to be found. You were born with it. And so it makes so much sense. So recovery means returning to, how you were made, the true self.
You're recovering your true self.
Yeah, and you can find the true self by, what do I feel? What do I need? What do I desire?
Yeah.
And you can test your desires. Is this lust or is this craving? If it doesn't fit into, I always think of Philippians 4:8. If it doesn't fit into whatever's good, true, noble, right, just, lovely, praiseworthy, excellent, or admirable, then it's probably into the lust territory. If it's not fitting into, it's not a craving, it's a lust. But I mean, we've got to get back to craving. But people are so scared of it because we don't know what to do with feelings.
Well, it's holding tension.
Yeah.
And if you're unable to or unwilling to hold that tension, then it's tough to bear the pain of wanting something and not having it.
Yeah. Yes.
Like those cookies.
Yeah. 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 I'm more sure that the knock on the door is somebody to come to take me away than somebody bringing me a present.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good
by
place,
experience,
Yeah, to
all of us
transition into talking about a movie.
Mm-hmm.
So what movie did you pick to bring to the theater today?
Yeah, I asked, and you know what? I love movies, and I kept coming back, and I just trusted intuition. I kept coming back to We Were Soldiers.
Yeah.
And it's old. It's in fact
2002.
It's only 2002.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was even
Only
older.
17 years ago. Well, that's
Yeah,
like,
that's it. Yeah.
I still say when I'm talking about 10 years ago, I'm still thinking about the 90s. And that's just not.
Gosh. Oh, somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, you're from the 1900s." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm from the 1900s." That's true now.
Yeah.
So this movie's from the 21st century. So that's good. Yeah, I picked We Were Soldiers because of really a couple of scenes, honestly.
So I shared with you before we started recording that I learned an important lesson yesterday, and that was that watching We Were Soldiers in between client sessions was not a good idea for me.
Yeah.
I had a 4:00 session yesterday, and so I started watching the movie before that. And right before my 4:00, Leanne came to the office to visit me.
Yeah.
And she walked in and she said, "What's going on?" Because she could just see something on me. And I said, and I think I was like 30 minutes from the end at that point. And I said, this movie, it was like it would just introduce you to characters and give you just enough about a character for you to feel like you knew them.
Yeah.
And then it would take them away from.
Yeah.
And I said, I cannot help but just think about what it would be like to lose you. And I can't help but think about what it would be like if you lost me.
Yeah.
And even before we went to bed last night, we were talking, and I said, before we got married, before I entered into therapy as a client, before I knew anything about my own heart, I got the concept of what it would be like to lose a person.
Yeah.
Like I got what it would be like to love somebody and lose them. I've lost people before.
Yeah.
I said, since going on my journey, since meeting you, falling in love with you, marrying you, now there's this thing in me that is afraid of something happening to me and you losing me.
Yeah.
And I'm watching this movie and that keeps coming out.
Yeah.
And I got this notebook in front of me that I carry in my backpack, and I wrote down on a little Post-it while I was watching it, what if you knew it would all be gone tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would that do in changing how you live?
Yeah. Cravings would come out and love would come with it.
Because I could just imagine, the first parts of this movie, these guys, they're meeting, they're all getting to the base, and there's a, I don't know what you call it, a party, a celebration, if you could even have celebration before you get shipped out, where there's dancing and there's a band and that kind of thing. And I couldn't help but just think, I bet in those moments, these guys are all thinking that way. Well, what if I don't come back?
There's the fact that the cool thing is that there's a 40-something-year-old leader guiding men who are barely men. They're 18, 19, in desperate need of leadership. But a leader in this movie is so beautiful that the way the military, as I understand it, and by the way, I haven't been to war, and I'm not glorifying war at all. I am speaking to the heroism of living underneath what this movie brought out. And Mel Gibson has played several characters, William Wallace, Patriot, this guy, and there was one other movie. He's played some great, wonderful, heroic, archetypal, pathos-oriented characters that are remarkable. I think Braveheart's one of the great movies about heart. Mm-hmm. Like the movie could be called Heart, because the word heart and the word courage are like synonyms. But this 47-year-old who's already been to battle knows what it's like to hurt, knows what it's like to be afraid, knows what it's like to see heartache, blood, death. He's sent back in, loss. He's sent back in because he knows healing. He knows what they're going to face, so he's more prepared than they are. So when the time comes, he's going to be there for them if he's a man of heart. So he gets all these volunteers. These actually guys volunteered for this thing. He kind of helped them volunteer. These weren't draftees only. He said, "Do you want to do this?" And then what was amazing was they went through all their training. They got ready for life. They got ready for war. They got ready to live. And then they had a graduation. Now, what was amazing was at this graduation, it was on a football field with some metal bleachers. And it wasn't a stadium full of 75,000 people. It was a little high school football stadium. The bleachers might hold 200 people. There were only 40 there, so to speak. And the only people there were family members, some military people. And the major, who was going to battle with them, stood there and said, "We're going to war." And he said, "We're going to go to what home was always made to be," which I thought was the strangest sentence. But he was saying, we're going to go and try to make a home safe for those who need it. Like, we're going to go fight for what home was always made to be. We're going to go fight to make safe. We're going to fight to make a certainty. We're going to fight to make a place where we can feel freely, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'm not talking about the righteousness of America. I'm talking about, but his speech was amazing. He stood before this small crowd where only loved ones were there, talking to a bunch of men. We're going to go fight for a nation, but the nation didn't show up. Just loved ones showed up. And he made this incredible speech. He said that, when you get into this place of need where strain comes to your life, you're not going to care anymore about your appearance, skin color, what religious background you are. What's going to matter to you and to me and to each other is whether or not the man's going to get your back, whether he'll stand in it with you, whether he'll stay when times get hard, whether he will help save you or you help save him when it's necessary. So it's kind of like he said, look to your right and to your left and say, will you be with me? And there's the inborn craving of the child. Will you stay? Will you be with me? Will you guide me? Will you show me? Will you stick with me? Will you raise me to be somebody who can do the same? Because I want to give what I'm getting, And then he said, we're going to war. And he said that that I promise you that you will all come home. I promise you will all come home, dead or alive. You're coming home. Like, good God! I'm like, I've got to fight because there's the nature of life. It's a war of love for something, So you fight to care, you fight to be generous, you fight to stay vulnerable. I'm talking about in recovery. And he said, I'm going to bring you home, dead or alive. And it's like, golly. So I'm drawn. If I volunteer to live, volunteer to participate fully, I want somebody to lead me who's going to bring me home.
Well, he said something in that same speech that I thought was just him kind of leading by example. He said, my feet are going to be the first to hit the battlefield,
and
they'll be the last to leave. And you even had this shot,
Yep.
which I got to say, I did not know heading into this movie that the movie was the battle.
Yeah.
I kept thinking that'll be a good slice of it. If it's a 2 hour and 15-minute movie, it'll be a good 45 minutes, and there'll be stuff before and after,
right.
But it's the whole movie. And there's this shot at the end of the last helicopter lifting off, and he walks up and he's surveying what he's leaving behind, and then the camera goes down to his feet as they step up onto the helicopter.
Yeah, and that's that last thing in that speech. He said, after he said all of that, make a promise, and then he said, I'll be the first one to set foot on the battlefield and the last one to take it off. I was moved. It's like, that's Jesus. I thought, that's Jesus. I'll be the first one. You're all coming home. I can follow that. That was a leader with heart, not a leader with just intellect. It wasn't engineering around people. He was in relationship of love for something even greater than himself. And then the clock starts ticking. Time to go. Do you remember that? That was such a brilliant move in that movie, I thought, when everybody's going to bed but nobody's sleeping. And the clock gets tick, 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 tick. And one man shows up at dawn in the dark, in one street light. They came from the dark into the light, left home with a ticking clock, going to a future they didn't know. But what they had was like the old great Scottish clan leaders. If we have each other, we have everything. If I don't have you, I have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So one came, two came, three came, four came. They looked at each other, they had nothing to say, except they had to go. It's just an amazing. Then, because you said the rest of the movie is just like, I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
I don't want to see it. But he did it. I mean, he proved himself true. He gave what every human being needs. I'll bring you home. You're made to trust each other. It's going to hurt. Tragedy is going to occur, but there's something greater than tragedy called relationship, called love, called longings. He spoke in that speech at that stadium with only family members there. It was just a ripple. There's nothing memorable except to the people who were there. And that's kind of the way our lives are. It's like, unless somebody near you knows your life, the world doesn't know your life at all. So, I mean, the message to me is clear. Stop attempting to make yourself known in the world and make yourself known at home. Mm-hmm. Make yourself known to the people you love, and live true to that. Be that person that people can follow. Be that person somebody can give themselves to you. Like you said, pour the Legos out on the floor, mm-hmm. and I will go through them with you.
Yeah.
Like you're not alone.
Yeah.
I'll be with you while you do this. I won't fix you. I'll walk with you. I just thought it was just an amazing series of scenes. And then when he actually fulfilled with his promise, and he did it. If he was alive, he was going to do it. Even defied the authority of engineering because they were telling him to get out.
Yeah.
And he said, heart matters more than your best thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, you say I'm more valuable than these men? No, I'm only valuable because of who I am with these men.
Yeah.
Oh, that was amazing.
I thought that's really something that his speech at the beginning really did, was it stitched them together.
Yep.
It created in them a relationship that they then depended on.
Yep.
And I can't say those that made it out. They all made it out, but those that made it out alive remembered.
Yep.
And even the reporter character, he even said towards the end, I don't know how to tell this story. And he said, well, you have to tell the people what these men did.
Yeah.
And why they did it.
Yeah. And that is so vital. That's how we know how to live, by people reminding us of stories. My youngest son, William, his name's John William Dodd II. And he is named after his grandfather. And there was a portrait. My grandfather, his great-grandfather, he never met. Wait, yeah, it was his great-grandfather, right? He's named after his great-grandfather, right? Yeah, my grandfather would be his great-grandfather.
Yes.
Yes.
I was like, I need a genogram just to track this.
Yeah, but his name was, they called him Bill, and Williams, it's always been William or Will or Willie. And but there was a chalk drawing done of him that is just wonderful. I mean, it shows the character in the face of him. But he was a sharecropper who was a very religious man, a hard man, a tough man, persevered through the depression, poverty. My father grew up plowing. I'm the first generation that did not grow up behind a mule. It's 2019.
Yeah.
My father grew up behind a mule and then said he wanted to become a physician. And he was told that we don't become physicians, okay? So you can forget it. But he did anyway, Wow. So he defied the odds. And William was breaking down his room because we're moving. And I noticed that one of the things he took from his room quickly was the portrait of his great-grandfather. Man he never knew, never met, but knows him well through stories of character, through stories of your great-grandfather was this. And he said, Dad, you're like him. And Dad, I respect you because I know where you came from. I know your stories. And I know stories about Gramps, who his grandfather passed away when William was, 9 years ago. So he was like 18. And so William appreciates the stories. William appreciates the past because he knows the story. So William has a context of what matters. And this story is like, you got to tell the story. And I think, Josh, I don't want to get off topic, but we live in a time where contact is matters more than connection. Like our technology contact, our social media contact, as if that's a relationship, when actually it's a two-dimensional thing, not a three-dimensional experience.
It sounds like it has to do with content.
Yes.
Contact is content.
Yes.
And relationship is process.
Yes, exactly. Connections, process. And Williams, in the process, he's got the portrait of his great-grandfather. He's got the stories of his grandfather. He knows me. I mean, he knows stories. He's asked me for stories, and I'll tell him. I tell him the good, the bad, and the ugly, you know. And he likes me. I mean, he likes me a lot, and I like him a lot. I get to see him tonight, in fact.
Yeah.
And we'll have a fire and sit and talk. And but that's the power of story to me. If we lose content with we lose a connection to the process. And to me, that story, that stadium speech, forgettable stadium speech, was saying that the story of the heart, and the story of connection, the story of relationship, and the story of how you gave yourself, what you saw, where you were, and the heroic matters more than all the days of our lives getting by. And the heroic is not the legendary as much as the heroic is, I gave my heart. I gave my heart. I gave my heart. That's the heroic.
It's being brave, which one of the greatest quotes on courage I've ever heard in my life was from Game of Thrones. On the TV show, it was in the first episode, but I always remember it in context of reading the book. And it's where Bran is talking to Ned about this guy that had, run from the wall, and Ned had just executed him. And Bran talked about, as Ned was going to battle and stuff, he asked, have you ever been scared? And Ned said, oh, I've always been scared. And he said, well, I always thought you were just so brave. And Ned said, a man has to be scared in order to be brave. And that's something that's just always, since engaging with that, since hearing that, has just stuck with me.
Yes.
That bravery, it's not the absence of fear.
No.
In fact, it presupposes the existence of fear inside of you, and it's choosing to act, and not in a reckless way.
Right.
It's not the abandoning of wisdom.
Yeah.
But it's choosing to act in the presence of fear.
Yes.
There's two parts. There's two things in the movie that I wanted to ask you about. Yeah, one was that there's several parts where these young men that Mel Gibson are leading lose their lives in ways that I would say weren't. I'm going to use the word necessary, but I'll unpack it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of Clark Gregg. That's the actor's name. I don't know the character's name. He gets shot in the shoulder. He's put on a helicopter that's getting ready to take off. Another soldier is brought up, and he says, oh, he's hurt more than me. I'll switch out with him. He'll get on. I'll take the next one. He stands up, helps load this guy on, and then turns towards the guy on the helicopter and gets shot and killed. There's the soldier played by Chris Klein who had a baby just before he left, Camille.
Yeah.
He wears the bracelet and was inspired by Mel Gibson's speech. And there's a part where he and another soldier are running back for cover. The other soldier gets shot. He's almost to safety. He looks and sees his comrade has fallen. He decides to go back, picks him up in the fireman's carry, and then gets shot and killed himself.
Yeah.
That there's a part of me, the pragmatic, the practical part of me that's yelling at the screen, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Get back to safety so you can get back home.
Yeah.
I don't really have a good question at the end of that, other than just like, there's clearly a heart at work there.
Yeah. It reminds me of, just as you even described it, as just scenes were flashing through my mind. I was in Oxford, Mississippi, working on a master's degree. And we lived literally in some barracks right across the street from the Oxford Cemetery where Faulkner's buried. But up on the top of the hill of the cemetery, there are some old cedars and 5 grave markers. And I remember I was just walking up there, and the 2 pillars were the parents, and the 3 smaller markers were the children. And all 3 of the children were grown men who died before the parents. One of them was shot here in Murfreesboro in December 31st, 1861, died January 1st, 1862, part of the Mississippi Cavalry, died in the Battle of Stones River here. And I'm thinking, what heartache did these parents experience with these 3 deaths? I mean, 1, yeah. 2, oh man. 3, all of their sons gone. And the parents lived another 20, 30 years. It's like, my God, oh God. You know, and there it is. And when I was saying earlier, life is tragic and God is faithful, I really mean it.
And those aren't exclusive.
No, but life is tragic.
Yeah.
Life is tragic. And only love, like what Mother Teresa did, she stepped right into that tragedy. So we always think of like the war tragedy, but she stepped into the tragedy of just life itself and people's treatment of each other, and would not let people die alone, as many as she could keep from it. I remember the story of her picking someone up. Someone of her helpers picked somebody up, brought her to Mother Teresa, and the woman lived an hour and a half. And Mother Teresa held her, and the woman's only words were, "Thank you." Thank you for what? For being with me. For somebody holding me before I passed out of this life that was been nothing but terrible. Yeah. And I'm not blaming God. I'm saying that we created a disaster, and God had intended it for something else. So that our worldview really matters when it comes to the tragedy of life. And I have a biblical worldview versus a naturalistic worldview, and I believe only the heart is what the naturalistic worldview denies the heart. The biblical worldview accentuates the heart, love. And so those men who turned back, I wouldn't want to do it, but I pray to God I would.
Yeah.
You know, that...
The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, you spoke so much about Mel Gibson's character and the heart and his leadership. There was a second leader on the field with him,
the Master
Sam
Sergeant.
Elliott.
Yes.
Who, I mean, and
he loved one person.
I got to tell
Mel Gibson.
He is on the short list of if I could pick a narrator for my life.
Yeah.
Just his voice.
Yeah.
But I someone whose feelings are cut off. And, ever since learning about what CPE is, and I was struck by this in watching the movie as well, I thought, there's certain careers where I would imagine part of your training is learning how to cut your feelings off. And I could imagine, him as the sergeant major, there are times where he is just standing like an oak tree in the middle of a battlefield with bullets zinging all around, and he's not moving.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine he's not afraid.
Right.
But clearly he's displaying that he's not.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that some of the guys that maybe you treated, brain surgeons or, law enforcement or, these high functioning guys, when somebody is disconnected from their heart and they're in a career where connecting with their heart in the moment may lead to a mistake, how do you help them engage with their heart?
That is a great question. Everybody who came to CPE was addicted, and which means that they had bumped into something they couldn't control. Just standing there in the midst of it, waiting to get killed, just didn't do them any good. I mean, getting to a point of not caring. And so once they're leveraged into that treatment, what we're offering them, and many times I would say, look, I get that you're smarter than I am. I get you're tougher than I am. I get you're probably a better person than I am in terms of your moral compunction, your perfectionism. But I got something you don't have. I've got heart. You lost yours. Now, if you want something different than what you've gotten, then let's look into this. If not, then they're your keys. Mm-hmm. Ultimately,
Sure.
after some time. And people want to live. And if there's a way to do it, most people will surrender to that.
Yeah.
Elliot in that movie was a character that was, we're supposed to assume that he really had heart, was really a good dude, and was really like a great guy, but he just kind of like bristled and was just tough. No, he wasn't a great guy. No, he wasn't a good guy. He was a cruel and savage person who possibly loved one person. It was Mel Gibson. But but he fed off of Mel Gibson's heart, and that was it.
He seemed to be a person to me that was all function.
Yeah, he was function.
He was the ultimate example of
not feeling.
Yeah.
Of not caring.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there is a wild bravery in being a machine. Mm-hmm. But when the war's over and the battle's done and the surgery's completed, the ball game's over, the sermon's completed, how do you go home? Because
what do you go home to?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And can you? Because trauma, Sam Elliott was only alive in battle, and he was incapable of going home. Mel Gibson was somebody who hungered to go home. Yeah. He wanted to get home. He didn't want to leave home, but he was called to have to because love mattered more, duty mattered more, courage mattered. The things that mattered more than safety and comfort. And he was a man of passion.
Well, speaking of battle, I think you mentioned before that you've been doing this for 30-something years.
Yeah.
Tell me something that you have learned from the clients that you've worked with.
That is a great question. Do you know what I've learned is something that's really countercultural for right now, is that we are all the same. I knew the spiritual root system when I developed was stating that, but then over 30-something years, it's proved itself that humans have never changed. We're all the same. We're all feeling, needing, desiring, longing, hoping creatures. The only thing that separates us is the culture that makes cult and melanin. The culture that makes cult means that like my grouping becomes my attitude towards life, and melanin becomes how we get damaged or how we harm each other, the color of our skin. Mm-hmm. But underneath, honestly, and I'm not using this as a way to say somebody shouldn't, quote unquote, be cared about, but blood's blood. We're one blood. We're one blood, and there's those who will admit I'm human, and those who will do whatever they can do to escape it. Those who admit they're human can also be people who seek forgiveness, share, and can admit when they've done wrong. Those who can't are not to be trusted. Mm-hmm. They need help.
And they'll do whatever they can to separate.
Yep.
Like they look for ways to dehumanize others because then they can consider them less.
Yep.
And that gives them license to do whatever they want to do.
Yep.
For their own ends.
Yep. And another thing I've learned is that this contributing, risking caring, risking finding that thing you're made to do and doing it, it's worth it. Because I've been privileged to get to do what I'm doing. I'm not saying it hasn't been tiring, but I've been privileged to get to work in the world of tragedy. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of made for it, so I don't know what, God's blessed me with me getting to do this. People ask me, like, how did you take it? And, honestly, it's like, thank God I have God and, exercise and relationships and that I can return to replenish in. But to get to be with these most amazing people who were lost and found, who were blind and now see, and to get to be a part of that, to walk people across the Badlands. It's inspiring. To get to give what was given to me.
Yeah.
Ripple. Man, it's been such a blessing. And that's how come I've written these books. And that's, in fact, Steve and James and I have a book coming out called Hope in the Age of Addiction. And the books don't make money. I mean, unless it's like a, super novel, the writing of books is just an effort of trying to give something away. Because the idea of, popularity or money, it ain't gonna happen. I mean,
well, if you're advocating for people to embrace pain and tragedy in their life, that's not exactly.
It's not a bestseller.
It's not a Joel Osteen book.
No. It's not. It's not. So your greatest life now. Feel the pain.
Yeah. Well, let's say that somebody was listening to our conversation today and they wanted to see you as a client.
Yeah.
Would they be able to? How could they get a hold of you?
Yeah. Look me up on chipdodd.com and email me there, or you can call 615-403-3761 because both of my phone numbers are on the website, but only one of them really I pay attention to. So that's why I've given that phone number out, which is my cell phone number. But what I'm doing now, I've changed my pace. I want to spend the rest of my career as an older man giving away what I've gotten, mentoring, and I call it consulting. It's not figuring your business out, but helping you process your life through.
Sure.
I want to spend time doing that. I'm going to be developing a lot more podcasts I'm doing a How to Live podcast, stories of our lives, and leadership.
Wow.
And I mean by leadership, like leading your own life.
Yeah.
Like doing that is the plenty that others receive from. So that's my plan.
Are those podcasts out now?
No, I haven't done any. Yeah, I've gotten 260 set up to do.
260 what?
Podcasts.
Individual podcasts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and each one of those breaks into probably 3. So I need to get on it, I guess.
You mean episodes or shows?
Episodes.
Oh, okay. I was thinking shows. I was like, you might be spreading yourself a little thin with 260 different shows.
Yeah. Would be 30-minute deals.
Wow.
Yeah.
When's the new book hit?
The Hope in the Age of Addiction will hit this spring, I believe. We just turned into manuscript. Steve and I did, and then Parenting with Heart it was a 2-book deal. Parenting with Heart came out, I think last October.
Okay.
And both are really good books. Both books are about, getting you, becoming you, and giving yourself away.
Yeah. Well, I will make sure in the show notes to link to a list on Amazon with the books. I cannot recommend to the listeners enough Voice of the Heart.
It's on audiobook too, by the way.
Oh, nice.
And let me throw out the one thing that nobody will ever hear. I did a novel audiobook, and I think it's the best thing I've ever done. It's futuristic, and I think it's about our future. I really do. So for those people who would like to listen to something nobody else does, or read a book nobody else,
Is that Perfect Loss?
Anthem to the Invisible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Perfect Loss was about the Beatitudes. I put that out in 2010. It's full of story about our own process we're made to go through, a powerlessness to being empowered from acorn to oak tree. But the Anthem to the Invisible is about loss of heart, and society has given up on the idea of relationship, and the collective has taken over, and science has even progressed to the point that metaphor, spirituality, science, and material world have all collided to form monsters.
Wow.
And it's really interesting. Then hunters awaken to go in search of the true self. And,
did you narrate the audiobook yourself?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's amazing is the book ends with a long prose poem that was the original Anthem to the Invisible. And that's what I wrote. And then I wrapped a novel around that.
Oh,
yeah. It's a stream of consciousness piece of writing that to me is just, I don't even know where it came from, honestly. So, but anyway.
Well, Chip, thank you so much.
Josh, thank you for inviting me.
It has just been an honor.
Yeah.
And, thank you for your time today, but thank you for the work that you've put out and the change that it has inspired in me and honestly, countless other people.
Yeah, man. You're welcome. I'm glad to meet you, and I love hearing what you're doing, and just to hear more and more about well, people like you doing what you do. I mean, the more there are of people who do what you do, that means the world can be a better place wherever you are. So, man, keep doing it.
Well, thanks.
Keep doing it. So, thank you, Josh. Good to meet you.
Hey guys, this is Josh. In case you missed our episode last week, at the end, Leanne came on and made a little bit of announcement, and that is that she would be stepping back from the podcast for the foreseeable future. Just as a way of, you guys know, anytime you say yes to something, you have to say no to something else to fulfill that yes. And right now, she needs to say yes to some other things that aren't the show. And so, as the president of the Leanne fan club, I, of course, totally supported her decision. As her husband, I'm a big fan of my wife taking care of herself. As the host of Therapist Theater, I'm sad. And even recording this wrap up, I definitely already miss her, especially for an episode that's so special, so near and dear to my heart, where I got a chance to meet somebody that I look up to, somebody who's had a big indirect impact on my life, and just got to experience sitting with them and just listening to them. So moving forward, this wrap-up portion of the show, it's just going to be me kind of recapping what's going on and maybe restating some things from the show, or maybe even just kind of ruminating on some things that I missed during the interview. So here we go. Of course, getting a chance to sit and talk with Chip was such a treat, and I just can't even express what it meant to me. As we wrapped up the interview, we turned off the recording. Chip pointed over to the corner of the office where he had a small bookshelf, and on it some hardcovers of The Voice of the Heart, and he's like, "Go ahead and grab one of those." And I was like, "Okay." And he said, "Those are the very last of the first editions of The Voice of the Heart." And so I was lucky enough to ask him if he wouldn't mind signing it for me. And so I have a signed hardback first edition of Voice of the Heart. And I actually brought my copy of Voice of the Heart, which is a paperback that I've, marked up and highlighted and written in, and it's got a bent cover. It's been used quite a bit. And I asked him if he wouldn't mind signing that too. So there's a part of me that was really worried that he was going to think that was cheesy, but there was another part that just thought, oh man, here's a guy that really put his heart and soul into his work, and that work coming from a place of his own personal journey, his own personal work and conception of that. And so I wanted to have a memento of it. And I just really appreciated that gift that he gave me, as well as just the gift of his time. I mean, I was really, really just transfixed the whole time I got to sit with him. To have a chance to listen to somebody that you look up to talk, I think, I don't know, maybe an hour and 15 minutes in the conversation, I realized, oh man, we need to get to the movie. Which is what we came there for, but I could have just sat and soaked it in. So I just want to say thanks, Chip. I appreciate you giving your time and giving your wisdom. And as I look back on our conversation, there's so many things that I feel like I need to go back and write down. Everything from, he mentioned it's the name of one of his books, but Parenting with Heart, addressing what's going on inside of me so that my kids don't have to endure my inability or my refusal to engage with my heart, as well as, it's okay to to let your kids want something. And not only is it okay, but it's actually beneficial for them. Leanne and I aren't parents yet, but we want to be one day. And so those are things that we do want to keep in mind as we move forward to that next stage of life. And gosh, of course, because my career is also centered in the addiction world, but just the talk of what addiction is, of what lust is. And I think even though it's something that I deal with on a daily basis, it's always good to have a reminder that anybody that's dealing with addiction or maybe even just a maladaptive behavior or coping strategy, that is that person's attempt at coping with the world around them. That's that person doing their best to engage in the world and deal with the pain and the tragedy that comes from that engagement. And I think to look at somebody and categorize them or stigmatize them or lump them into or put a label on them that they're defined just by a behavior is dismissing. And I think it's not very compassionate, and it's not very understanding, and it's I think damaging. And that's not to say that if you have a loved one dealing with an addiction or something that healthy boundaries for you aren't important, but that's just to say that these are people who are doing their best. And I know that every client that I've ever sat with who is dealing with something like that doesn't want to be dealing with it, but it's something that helps them stay above water. And so it then becomes the job of the therapist, becomes my job to find out, what's the water? What is the problem that you're turning to the addictive substance or behavior as a solution to try to solve? And then to help them find, we'll help them resolve the problem, but to help them find coping strategies that are more effective and more healthy and less damaging. And it's just always good to get a reminder of those kinds of things. And so I appreciated that from Chip. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed the wrap-up of today's episode. I know it's a little bit of a shock to the system because usually this is the part where Leanne's here. And not strangely enough, but in the life of this show, this is the 46th episode, I have had more people come up to me and compliment and ask about and say how much they enjoy Leanne's portion of the show than any other portion of the show. And I can't say that I'm surprised because she is just as much as it comes through on the show of her just being a ray of sunlight, she's that in real life too. So, but it's not a permanently closed chapter. She may pop back in from time to time. And I hope that I can kind of wrap things up in just as effective a way as she did. So thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you click on the episode in your podcast app to bring up the show notes. We've got time codes there, links to Chip's stuff, as well as links to all of the places you can find Therapist Theater: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Pretty sure that's it. Yeah, I hope that you had a great time, and I hope to see you back next week. We're going to go ahead and raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.